sell her product to her audience.
I think you're absolutely right. She really was a marketing genius. And that is one of those things you think, if I could only talk to her, how did you know? But I think some of the seeds were planted from observing the women in her church. So St. Paul African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME Church, has a long tradition of being a more educated congregation. So there were school teachers, there were women who were suffragists who were involved in a national organization called the National Association of Colored Women. There was a women's auxiliary to the Black Knights of Pythia. So she observed these women. They even had conventions in her church, and she could see the power of women organized. And she knew she had benefited from their mentoring. And she took those lessons and applied them as she was starting to train her sales agents. As she traveled around, as she and her husband, C.J. Walker, traveled around, she would, much to my surprise, I've been able to find ads in papers as early as 1906 and 1907, now that so much is digitized, where she'd take out an ad because she was going to a town and she'd say, I'm going to be at this church or this community hall on this date. Please come for a lecture. She'd give a big lecture, and she had seen people give lectures in her church, sometimes with what would be kind of a PowerPoint presentation now, but called a stereopticon, an illustrated lecture. So she had seen that kind of thing, and she'd give a lecture to a big audience. And then after the big lecture, she would invite a smaller group of women, maybe 10 or 12 women, to come to the basement of the church, and she would demonstrate her system. And she would watch who was the woman who asked the best questions, who did the other women gravitate towards, and she would make that person her lead agent. And then she would move on to the next city. So she really did have this sense of showing images, showing pictures, showing success, and then picking leaders.
And she just kind of innately understands this, because it's not as if she attended a seminar or went through a training program.
No, absolutely. But I do think that there is something really key about these other women in the church, some of whom the National Association of Colored Women was founded in 1896. And it included women like Mary Church Terrell, who had been educated, who'd gone to Oberlin, who traveled in Europe, some who were teachers. And so these were women, surprisingly to most people, who did have a degree of sophistication. And she was not formally educated. She was really very much a self-educated person, but she took lessons from them. And she could see, in some ways could model herself after what they were doing.
And that's part of why she adopts the title Madam. Right.
Absolutely. So, this Madam is kind of it's a bit of an affectation. And I think she knew that. She was pushing herself out there. And if you look in old newspapers, you'll see that women who owned boarding houses or who were caterers, businesswomen, they would call themselves Madam. And then I also have to joke because women who had illegal businesses also used that title.
Not that kind of Madam.
Not that kind of Madam.
So she grows this business into a huge enterprise. Just so the audience has a conception of what we're talking about, just how successful did she become?
Madam Walker trained thousands of women. She traveled all over the United States, the Caribbean, and Central America, made that trip in 1913. And by the time she died in 1919, the company was claiming to have trained 20,000 women. Now, it's a combination of her personal teaching as well as her agents who were also training women. There were sometimes mail order courses. She held conventions. She held her first convention in 1917 with more than 200 women who came from all over the United States. And she began to invest in real estate so that by the time she died in May of 1919, she was a millionaire. And we're fortunately able to document that because she surrounded herself with a great C-suite, her general counsel, her general manager, her secretary, her bookkeeper. They kept great records, which we still have. So we know every year when her lawyer, general manager did an annual report, we know down to the penny how much her sales were.
And that kind of brings me to